So thanks for having me. I'm Nathanael Snow. I'm assistant teaching professor of economics at Ball State University. My opinions are my own. My errors are definitely my own. But I'm glad to be talking with you today about this legislation and how it might affect us. I'm going to give you a 30,000-foot view of this stuff because I am not usually down and in the weeds of legislation. That's not the kind of thing that I normally do. I do political economy work and historical political economy. Usually, I teach intro macro and intermediate macro at Ball State, but I also teach some other classes like history of economic thought, some law and economics, and a bunch of other boring things. I'm hoping to teach a course on the economics of migration next spring. So I'm calling it Should I Stay or Should I Go? A Clash course on human immigration. So if you have students or know of students who are looking for a course next spring, let me know, and I'd love to sign them up. At the Institute for the Study of Political Economy, we offer programs for students. We took 13 students to Washington, D.C. this spring. We met with 3 members of Congress and went through at least one other congressional office while we were there. We heard talks from economists and other people involved in the community. We lead a reading group or 2 every semester. We bring students on and hire them to do research with us. So I advised 2 student projects this year. One was an honors thesis on comparing the legislature of Indiana with the legislature of Illinois and how those differences add up. And another one was about the cost of hospitals. And what happens when a hospital closes, how does that affect expenditures? So we do a lot of interesting stuff. Hope you'd be interested in finding out more about us. We also bring in speakers regularly. You all are welcome to those events if you want to let me know you're interested. And what else can I say? We're very involved. Did you have a question already? No? Okay. All right, so that's Ball State. Now, here's what I'm not going to try to do today. I'm going to try to not bore you. But that's because this is actually just a trigger warning because my next slide is this. Okay, and some of you are already having, adverse effects because, oh my God, it's a graph. Why would you do that to us, Snow? This is a graph that I devised using sort of back of the envelope calculations of what happens when we add up all of the different taxes that the average person has to pay. So assuming an individual has roughly a $75,000 income, right? If that's their salary, how much do they actually get to keep, and how much does it actually cost the employer to hire them? And when we add up all of the taxes, you've got income tax, and I gave, this is all back of the envelope, income tax, property tax, FICA tax, sales tax, state tax, car registrations, all of those kinds of things are things that affect the supply of labor, whether or not you're willing to work, and then things like the employee tax that employers have to pay, capital gains tax, and other things. Those affect how many workers an employer is willing to hire. And what ends up happening is that there's a wedge created between the income that the employee takes home and the cost that the employer has to pay to hire them. So there's a wedge between them, and that wedge represents the inability for the employee to walk home with the full value of the labor that they contribute to the firm. Right? They're walking away with much less than the value that they contribute to the firm. And the second thing that happens is that fewer people are hired. So one of the sources of unemployment in any economy is going to be taxes. So to zoom in a little bit on this, right? The green area is called the tax revenue. The gray area is deadweight loss. Those deadweight losses are potential gains from exchange that do not obtain because those transactions never occur. So we've foreclosed upon those employment opportunities. Right? We've foreclosed upon the opportunity to hire and the opportunity to work. People who only find, value in working above $70,000 are probably not even going to bother. They'll stay home and play Fortnite. as I tell my students. So when an economist from a strictly kind of positive point of view in analyzing what we're doing looks at a tax, we're most concerned not with the tax revenue. We presume that the governments, whichever level of government receives those revenues, are going to spend all of that money perfectly wisely. That's a silly assumption, right? Our concern is with the deadweight loss. How is this affecting economic growth and economic opportunity for people and the gains that come from those exchanges? Those lost gains from exchange mean that people have less money to spend on whatever it is that you're selling. We want as much surplus to obtain in society as we can, because that means that they have more money in their hands to spend on whatever it is you're selling. So we're here to talk about what this guy did, along with the rest of the supermajority in the Indiana legislature. And I want to just harken back real quick. Back in 2020, the O'Neill School held an event where 3 people were invited to talk about the election that year, and Mike Braun was senator at the time. He represented the Republican point of view, and I represented the libertarian point of view. Not that I am a capital L libertarian, I am not, but I can say I debated Mike Braun, and I'm happy to debate Micah Beckwith if he's willing to do that. Okay, so this is something that's very important to me. I say that the appropriate role of the political economist, to me, is to demonstrate to the public in deliberation, that's y'all, in conversation here, right, what the relevant opportunity costs are to alternative policy arrangements. There's nothing about should in this statement, right? I'm going to try to keep the should out of the room. Instead, I'm trying to give you, as much as I can, strictly positive analysis so that you can go and deliberate and talk about whether you like what's happening or whether you don't, but hopefully you're a little bit more informed about what's going on. So the bill passed. This was the voting in the Senate. There were 27 yeas and 22 nays. If you recognize your representative here, make a mental note. And here's those who voted in the House. And it passed 65 to 29. So this was not strictly along party lines, if I remember correctly. There were some people who crossed over. I don't know if they crossed over both ways, but it was not passed unilaterally. What happens? Okay. So the main takeaways I feel like some of these are out of order, but it's okay, we'll get through it. The main takeaways that I have are that we're going to cut residential property taxes, and the maximum reduction in property taxes that any homeowner will experience is $300. So at the best, you're going to pay $300 less in property taxes next year. If you own a home that's worth $300,000, that's what your reduction is going to be. If you own a home worth $100,000, you're going to pay $100 less in property tax. If you own a home worth $500,000, you still only get the $300. It caps at $300. All right, so that's the reduction in property taxes. It raises the minimum filing for BPP, which, as I understand it, is property owned by firms that's used in production processes, and there's a tax on that, so it reduces that tax, the threshold at which, it raises the threshold at which you have to report in order to file taxes on that from $80,000 to $2 million. So think of a firm that has not operating expenses, but personal property, capital equipment, and resources that they use at their disposal. Think of a plumber who owns their truck and tools, right? Maybe they own $80,000 worth of equipment that they use in doing their job, right? They don't have to report the ownership of that capital for tax purposes. And normally that property is taxed. Now it's moving from $80,000 to $1 million and then to $2 million. So what kinds of companies are operating with $2 million worth of equipment? We're talking small restaurants. We're talking a lot of small medical practices, some attorney offices, right? So those firms will no longer have to report what capital they own, all right, their personal property they own in their tax revenues. It discontinues the 30% depreciated value of capital tax, which means that that you're able to deduct more of the value of your capital, I think. There's all kinds of exemptions. I looked at the bill and saw that it was 345 pages long and said, no thanks. Don't have enough time to do that. There's people who do that. But I did read the 15-page legislative note about this, which is somewhat accessible to the layperson. There's also this shift from state-level property taxes to local income tax increases, and local jurisdictions can raise their income tax rates by up to 1.8%, and I think that's combined county and municipality. If I get any of this wrong, right, please let me know later on. I'm working on this and trying to understand it myself. Okay. So what happens? If your house is above, what do I expect to happen economically? If your homes that are worth $300,000 or more, right, are only going to hit that $300 benefit from the property tax reduction, I would expect to see, once you hit that $300,000 house threshold, that people will build even bigger houses more. The BPP portion, we might expect to see many firms keeping the overall capital ownership of those firms below that $2 million threshold. So suppose you own a restaurant and you could expand the size of that restaurant, but if you did, the total amount of property that you owned to run that restaurant would exceed that $2 million threshold. Now you have to report the whole thing, and you're taxed on the whole thing, right? It creates a cliff at which people are going to report or not report. So we'll see a lot of firms staying under that $2 million threshold intentionally so as to not have to report at all, right? So in economics, we think about the entrepreneur or the person who's running the firm as trying to discover what size firm is optimal for producing the thing that I produce, right? So if I can achieve what we call economies of scale, if the average cost of producing my product goes down by producing more of it, I might need more capital equipment to do that, but if I can be more efficient in my production by having a larger scale of operation, if that's going to bump into that $2 million threshold, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stay smaller. I'll be producing less efficiently. That means that prices to consumers are going to be higher, and we're actually wasting resources as a society. We're doing something in a less than most efficient way, and those resources could be used to do anything else. And now they're not available to do that because we're artificially keeping things small.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it went from 80,000 to 2 million, right?
The threshold which you have to report.
See who grew because you moved it from 80,000 to 2
There will be, that's right. So many will move and grow between that 80,000. Thank you very much. That's very important, right? Anybody that's between that 80,000 and $2 million level, they will expand, but they'll bump up against that $2 million.
Verify your theory about the impact.
That would be fantastic. Yeah, you're right. There could be an opportunity for an empirical study on this. That's right. Okay. The discounting of depreciating value of capital could lead to greater amounts of automation. So I'll come to that again in a minute and explain a little bit more. There are exemptions that are handouts. Those benefit, amongst other people, retired folks. So if you're above age 65, there's a benefit to you. If you're a military vet, there's something to that. The real puzzle here is what's the net effect to local communities, to the average person, and to the municipal government? What kinds of things are affected? Right. So locally, we can think about schools, libraries, emergency services, higher ed. So in the news, we hear, there's not a whole lot to cut here. Floyd County is going to cut recycling programs after new property tax law. So for them, it will no longer be efficient to offer the free recycling program. They may have to charge for the recycling at this point. So there's an outcome there. How much money Will your school district lose under the new tax proposal? Many people are concerned that the local school districts are going to lose money, and that can be true. There's a lot in the law related to charter schools, and that's consistent with other policy changes around school choice. The Indiana Library Federation says that they are going to lose about $12.2 million by 2026 and be down by $16.8 million in 2028. Now, each of these claims is supposing that no adjustments are made at local levels of taxation. However, there is room in the law for changing where the tax revenue is collected from the state level through property taxes and other ways, instead having those revenues collected at the local level by an increase in income taxes. For Delaware County, the change in property tax revenue is going to be about $6 million, $6.5 million in 2026, $7 million in 2027, $12.3 million in 2028. Yes?
Are those your calculations?
No, these come from the legislative note. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions? And I cut off a bunch of the other counties so we could get to Delaware on there. Yeah.
Just more comment. If you want to check out the legislative note, you can go to iga.in.
Freely accessible, yeah, very easy to get a hold of. Took about 10 minutes Googling. All right, so here's a little math for Delaware County. We're going to lose, I'm rounding up here to $10 million in revenue through the property tax law. Suppose, though, that we increase the local income tax. How much would we have to increase it by? So suppose that there are 50,000 people employed in Delaware County, which actually is, I think, below the actual number. Suppose that the average taxable income for the average person in Indiana is in Delaware County is $50,000. It would require a 0.4% increase in taxation, in income taxes at the local level to generate the same $10 billion that's going to be lost from property taxes. So 0.4% of $50,000 is $200. If you own a $200,000 home, the change in what you're going to pay in taxes is a wash. It's just a difference in who you pay it to. You following? I'm not always the most followable person. All right. Okay. So this is another, I'm sorry, trigger warning, there's another graph coming. All right. So in my intro classes, I introduced a concept called the production possibility frontier. And the idea here is that firms will use a combination of labor and capital to make whatever it is that they're making. The lower curve represents perhaps the current regime, right? Where we choose a certain mixture of labor and capital. We hire this much capital, or we pay this much for our capital, and we hire this much labor, we pay this much for our labor. The change in the law can create incentives for firms to move from more labor-intensive production processes to more capital-intensive production processes. Those capital-intensive processes will automate more of the job. As a result, what do we expect to see happen? First of all, there should be an increase in total level of productivity. So when we look at the total factor productivity measures for any region that's going through this, we should see increased levels of productivity. However, there will be fewer people hired. The people who are hired might be earning more, but there will be fewer people hired. So the example, and I did talk to Mike Hicks about this. I came up with my own ideas, but I did talk to Mike Hicks. He was saying that if CanPack hits this, observes this, they're liable to sell whatever capital equipment they currently have, buy new capital equipment that's more automated, hire fewer workers that are more technically sophisticated. So this is a likely outcome of this change. Now, that reduces employment in Delaware County, but it could increase the income of the people who do have jobs. I don't know whether that's good or bad. It depends on where you land in that structure. So I want to do another Indiana thing here, all right? I'll talk for a couple of minutes about ideas introduced by Eleanor Ostrom. Anybody know who Eleanor Ostrom was? So she won the Nobel Prize in economics, though she was a political scientist, for her work on self-governance and the way that communities govern themselves. Her husband, Vincent Ostrom, and she operated the Ostrom Workshop at IU Bloomington. That is still operating. It's a fantastic program. I try to recommend students get involved there. I met Lynn after she won the Nobel. It was a lovely meeting. What she's asking is, what level should public goods be provided at? So for now, I'm assuming the same level of public good provision. Right? We can debate and discuss what level of public goods should be provided through taxation. Right? But first, let's just talk about, let's leave it all the same, but at what level should they be provided? So this is just a silly little model, right? We've got the state is blue, we've got the counties are yellow, and the communities are green, the municipalities are red triangles. We've got all these different levels of policy. What level should something be handled at? So in Delaware County, a couple years ago, we went through a change in management of EMS from the county level to the municipal level. I believe that's what happened. I'm not 100% representing that from total knowledge. What level should schools be managed at? Should it be state level? Should it be county level? Should it be community level? And we do a mix of both, although there is an awful lot of state level funding for schools. When we allow these different levels to happen, the struggle that we have to face is which level are stakeholders going to be well informed about what's happening with the management of that policy and able to communicate to the decision makers what they think is the change in policy that should happen. This is a political economy kind of thing. So for example, right, we got federal, state, county, and municipality. You got your total tax burden. At what level should public goods be provided? Where do you prefer to pay for your public goods? Right? Where do you prefer to buy your milk? Right? I prefer to buy my milk at Fresh Time because I really like the Amish milk they sell. Right? But maybe you've got a huge household and you drive down to Noblesville regularly and go to Costco and buy bulk milk there, right? Where do you buy what you buy? Where do you want to buy your public goods? We've seen a decrease, supposedly, in taxes at the federal level. There's some discussion about, well, those are going to be recaptured through tariffs. Call me skeptical. That's the most normative thing I'm going to say, I hope. The state level, we've seen a potential decrease in revenues, in tax burden. Here we can see an increase both at the county and the municipal level. It could be that the total tax burden doesn't have any change at all. So, or we could think about the problem this way. We can say the federal and state subsidies to counties and municipalities will decrease. So some counties generate more tax revenue for the state than others. And when the state makes their allocations, sometimes the state pays more to a county than what that county generates for the state. It's a subsidy. Right? I would guess, and somebody here I'm sure could tell me whether I'm right or wrong, that Delaware is a net recipient both of federal and state funding. So we as a community pay in less than what we receive. Does that make sense to you? Does that ring true? Okay. So then, high-income regions, if we switch to more of the public goods being provided at the local level, we will see on net a reduction of tax revenues allocated locally to low-income regions and an increase in net tax revenue spending to high-income regions. Right? So Fishers pays more than Muncie does in taxes. Fishers is also going to get, they're going to pay their own taxes locally, and that money will stay in Fishers. Whereas we will be receiving less of the taxes that Fishers pays here in Delaware County. Is that just or unjust? I'm not going to say, right? That's for the public in deliberation to decide. Yes?
Aren't property taxes returned to the municipality that they come from?
I don't know.
Or aren't they paid locally?
I think they are paid locally. I pay my taxes at Delaware County.
The county treasurer keeps them and then divvies them out.
So that may be true. So other people are going to know better than me.
So really, so there's no, look, if the income tax, local income tax is increased.
Yeah, so if,
So it's, just to be clear, the state is not changing its tax rules for the collection of state taxes.
Right.
The state is imposing a change on every county. The state is telling the county how much revenue they can generate using property taxes.
Yeah.
So it's not, the county is the unit that used to set property tax rates and collect property taxes, and then Zach has a beautiful model that shows, or diagram that shows the different taxes, the different units that get money from your property taxes, your schools, your city, your public health. So this isn't the state changing its tax policy. This is the state imposing a new rule on counties. Is that what you were saying?
that's,
Well, that and also,
that's really helpful.
I don't think that there's necessarily
So then the changes in subsidies may not be
yeah,
actually
that's
happening.
my point.
Okay, I'm happy to be wrong
You
about
say
that.
Suggesting that the property taxes go to the state and came back, but they don't.
Okay,
Did I understand you?
I think that you're probably more right than me. So yeah, yes.
Is there still a state-imposed property tax cap of 1% for all municipalities?
I believe so. Okay. Some of the ways that I think about this, right? The state income tax is a flat tax, which many people would consider to be a regressive tax. Lower income people pay a greater share of their disposable income when there's a flat tax imposed. The property tax is going to be more regressive because high-income households that have expensive homes are capped. The local income taxes are also flat. This is regressive. Sales taxes are also regressive. So on net, this is going to be a greater burden on low-income families than on high-income families. There's other ways to do these things. So Eaglin Weil and Eric Posner have this crazy idea in their book Radical Markets. And in this book, they talk about imposing a 17% property tax at the federal level. Now, you would assess the value of your home yourself and assert it. So you could say that my house is only worth $100,000, right? But whatever price you say that your home is worth, when you assert that, is a commitment to sell to anybody at that price. So Bob walks in off the road, has $100,000 on your tax report. You said your home was worth $100,000, $100,000. It's Bob's house now, right? So there's that tension between what you think it's worth and what tax you pay on it. This idea was earlier proposed as a way to compensate slave owners for the emancipation of slaves in the West Indies. So the slave owner would have to assert the value of the slave. They would pay a high tax on it, but that whatever value they asserted the value of the slave to be was a commitment to sell or emancipate at that price, right? This helps to overcome holdup problems for eminent domain projects. Right? So you want to build a railway through California, right, from San Diego to Sacramento or to San Francisco. You got to buy all that property along the way, but everybody's going to be a holdout trying to say that their property in particular is worth way more than it actually is because they don't want the train there, right? This would help to eliminate those kinds of problems in public works provisions. There's an infinite number, right, of different property tax regimes and other types of tax regimes. So in 2016, I worked with Ben Carson's team when he was proposing a flat tax for all of America and getting rid of the IRS basically and the progressive income tax structure that we have, and he would eliminate all of the exemptions with that flat tax. So he proposed a 17% flat tax and no exemptions at all. People were concerned, oh, that's going to mean that lower income people are harmed. we said, well, we can allow for provisions and programs for low-income families so that they're made whole, and they're made no worse off by this program, but we'll keep our expenditures separate from our revenues. Right? We have the revenues and the taxes, and we have our expenditures. And it would close a lot of loopholes for people who are claiming loopholes on their taxes. It would, the net effect would mostly be that accountants wouldn't have anything to do. Of course, it didn't obtain. Ben Carson didn't win. Ben Carson had a bunch of other weird policies, including the weird policies that I worked on. The last thing I'll say about that is that I primarily advised Carson on trade policy, and Carson was the last presidential candidate to support the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership program to reduce tariffs overall. So that's the proudest thing I have about that kind of thing. I know all of you know more about this than I do probably, but I thank you for letting me talk about it and share a little basic econ with you. Happy to entertain questions or comments or corrections from the field. Yes?
Have you ever looked at a national sales tax to replace income tax?
In Europe, they use a value-added tax, which is actually more efficient even than a flat tax. So many economists will say that the best kind of tax is a national level value-added tax that could replace income taxes. Yes, that's in many people's opinion the ideal solution.
Does that work at every level of improvement of a raw material to?
Again, when an economist thinks about these kinds of things, right, the main thing that we're worried about is that great triangle.
Hey, can you explain what each of those lines are?
So yes, this is the supply of labor. So people who are willing to offer their labor at different prices. This is the demand for labor, the price that an employer would be willing to hire somebody at, right? And then the taxes move the obtaining transaction from here to here, and there's this wedge created between the cost of employing and the take-home pay of the worker.
So is everything below the dotted line for labor supply unemployment?
So this line is labor supply,
Yeah.
right, after imposing all the taxes. These lines are labor demand. This labor demand line, the bottom one, is after imposing all the taxes.
So where's the unemployment line? I mean,
So unemployment is this region from here to here, this triangle. Those are people who won't get jobs because it's not worth employers to hire them at that point.
I keep asking questions. You guys, somebody shut up. But if the labor supply increases with the pay rate, it
Yes.
decreases without the pay rate, but we're not killing people to decrease the supply of human beings.
Well, we're reducing immigration, but yes, we are reducing immigration, but
Yeah. So I mean, there's still that number of people that aren't working. If the pay rate goes down, people and the supply of labor goes down. But
those are just people that stop offering their labor for hire. They decide, I'd rather stay home than work for that much money.
So they'd be unemployed.
So they become unemployed.
So unemployment goes up
Yes.
in that circumstance. So that really isn't measured on the graph, or is it?
The unemployment, so the x-axis would be number of hours employed, so to speak. Right? And so we move from this many hours working to this many hours working.
The decreasing pay rate decreases the incentive for people to work.
Yeah. Yes.
Have you noticed any generational shifts in that curve due to, I guess, a different perspective of how much it's like worth it to have that trade-off?
Are young people today entitled?
That's exactly not my question.
Okay.
So my question is, do young people have a different perspective of the like go-go 80s that like I started my career in, where, you know, boarding gecko, lunches for wimps, like that attitude, versus the attitude today that there's other aspects of life other than, you know, counting on the dollar?
I can only respond from like my observation set of working with university students. There's a mixture there. we're able to do a lot more in a lot less time. So the opportunity cost of working is higher. You have more free time. We have more free time. We spend all of our free time scrolling, but we have more free time. I prefer to think that people are generally the same, today, yesterday, and forever.
So you're not seeing a shift in the numbers that make up that curve?
No, not explicitly from this. We had lower population growth rates, and we were experiencing a continuing reduction in population growth. Let's go to Nate.
A couple questions. One, what do you think the intent was for this?
The intent for the legislation?
Intent, I mean, like the real intent behind it.
They have to pass a budget. I understand that Braun is largely sympathetic with many of Trump's policies. So it may have been a demonstration of fealty to that overall point of view. I think that the optics of a cut in property tax are attractive to many people. The fact that retirees and vets are exempted from some of the new taxes means that it's a handout to them, and they are a large voting constituency in Indiana. So those are my initial thoughts. So politicians have to get elected. The number one goal of a politician is to keep the office that they have, and then to get more power if they can. I'm the same way. I treat all human beings as the same. We're all knaves. Actually, I meant to include it. There's an image of David Hume who said, "We're all knaves," and somebody imposed my face on Hume's, because that's one of the things I support the idea of. So economist Brian Kaplan said that we get the policies that we ask for, that we vote for, but the thing is that a politician does have to get reelected. And so oftentimes they will refrain from imposing the worst possible policy, even if the voters voted for it. So we get the policies that we ask for, only not quite as bad, because they want to get reelected. Yeah?
If you had to guess, based on the totality of policy changes that have happened since the November election, what's going to be different in Muncie, Delaware County? So we're talking about at the federal level, at the state level, at the
Yeah.
local level.
Yeah, where are we going to be on that?
Do you think this is going to move the mayor to impose the income tax? If so, is there a mechanism, like, does he have to pass a referendum, or are we going to go through that? Like, is our school going to have the same program? I mean, what's, like what you said, is it $6 million out of the county budget? Or
6.5, yeah.
it was the city budget? The county. City's not. Yeah, and the county budget in total was what?
Total budget $60 million.
60 million.
10%.
So it's a 10% cut.
That $6 million is just the aggregate of all the local budgets
Okay.
in Delaware County. It's not the county budget. It's the aggregate of the city, county, all the towns, school, library.
And is everybody losing 10% as a result? So is the city losing 10%, the county losing 10%, the school district losing 10%?
No, it will be 10%.
More or less?
Less.
So what, I guess the question is like, this whole Ostrom thing that people kind of adjust, they self-adjust, they learn how to manage their own affairs, like, what's the outcome going to be with this reduction in public resources and the allocation of those resources in private hands? At the same time that we're going to have fewer workers, at the same time that, you know, the number one employer in town, the university, is receiving a separate budget cut. Like, what's that going to look like for Muncie and Delaware County?
I don't have straightforward answers. I could say that if the tariffs obtain, I will expect employment in Muncie in Delaware County to go down, particularly in manufacturing, which is ironic because it's the opposite of what the tariff policy is supposed to create. The state level taxes, I would expect employment to go down and a shift towards automation, as I was discussing before. The schools or the libraries are concerned about a shift, right, in resources away from them. Will Muncie and Delaware County get together and say we want to support our libraries and we're willing to accept an increase in local income taxes in order to fund that? It's up to y'all. Other public good provision. So here's an interesting question, right? Do we trust the local population to get involved and talk about the issue and to communicate their point of view well to those who are making those decisions? Not everybody's very good at that. Maybe the dynamism of the moment will encourage more activism, though. Maybe more people will get involved and speak up more about things and show up to more meetings. I walked through an exercise in my class where I demonstrate to students, or they discover for themselves really, that the impact of their vote in terms of shifting policy is relatively small and costly, but that the impact of going and talking to a lawmaker or somebody who's actually making decisions directly, writing a letter to the editor, can be worth tens of dozens of votes in terms of the impact that it has on the policy that obtains. So I encourage my students, right, to get involved. Find an issue that you're interested in, become well informed, and then be part of the crew of people that's informing decision makers, because otherwise the lobbyists are going to do it, and lobbyists have their own incentives and goals. Yeah.
Like from a state level perspective, you got places like Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, greater Indianapolis, that are growing, and they're going to lose some tax revenue, but they're likely going to be able to absorb that with,
Growth.
And then you got places like Muncie that are, pretty stagnant. Been that way for a long time, so it's going to be a lot harder to absorb that tax revenue loss without making changes to local income tax, all those things. I'm just wondering, so you're going to start having higher taxed counties over time, wondering if that, that might create more concentration where there's like up-and-coming cities, and you got almost like a death sentence to the old industry cities around that are already really struggling. I'm wondering if that's accurate kind of extrapolation, or just
I'll offer my most controversial take. Local politicians are concerned about the tax base. I presume that everyone who's involved in local government means quite well, but they face incentives, the same as I do, and I consider myself a knave. So does my wife. But so maintaining a tax base is a strong incentive to local politicians, and maintaining a tax base by increasing population is the most direct way of doing that. So subsidies, tax abatements to large industry are often offered as an attempt to attract industry to a region in order to attract population to a region. I think most of that is misspent. I think that Muncie could get smaller gracefully, and that ought to be something that we hope to see. The goal shouldn't be to have as large of a tax base as possible in Muncie. The goal ought to be that those who are in Muncie have an increasing quality of life. And having an increasing quality of life might require that Muncie gets smaller. What amenities attract people to a town? Dr. Hicks has got a ton of stuff out there on this. Right? What quality of life measures are important to people in choosing where they're going to live? Parks are important, but high quality schools are top. So is there a way that we can support our schools better? I can think of a dozen, right? Will school choice help or hurt that? It's a big debate. I'm happy to talk a little bit about school choice issues. Yeah, that's kind of my angle on it. Seth's been waiting patiently. Go ahead.
Kind of along with that, I think there's a lot of, this is a little separate from targets, but kind of the second order effect. People will talk about how do employers attract talent, or does talent attract employers and talent? And you hear a lot of discussion, like you go online, go to Facebook groups, read the comments around here, they always say, well, if Muncie's having factories that pay people $30 an hour, 35, whatever it is. Wouldn't this reduction in residential property taxes plus the incentive to more automate factories more, shouldn't that be like more blinking red lights to the city that employment is attractive to talent, and that Muncie should work to increase quality of life in order to make the talent more eager, or should we continue pushing abatements, pushing our TIF districts in order to get these and continue the strategies we've done in the past and continue to do, or should we try to aim for a policy arrangement that pushes toward getting more people to stay from Wall State and attracting more talent? Like what would you say? What would you pick out of the two?
Again, I'm somewhat a little bit ambivalent about how big Muncie stays. I think that chasing after population for the sake of chasing after population is wrong-headed. That chasing after quality of life for residents and those who might choose to live here ought to be the primary focus and ought to be reiterated regularly. So when policies are made, that ought to be always frontmost in the discussion. When you ask the question, does the jobs attract talent or does talent attract jobs? In really big cities, right, it's usually amalgamations of particular industries where you get a crucial quantity of people that are working within an industry such that there are spillover benefits from working in an industry in an area where lots of other people are working in that same industry. That's how you get a Silicon Valley. So we see that kind of a thing happening. You've got to be big enough to make a difference, though. Right? And Muncie's not going to be that big. Indianapolis has the pharmaceutical industry. Perhaps we can also have pharma here. I don't know. We used to be in the middle of automobile manufacturing. We still have some of that, but not the same level. Can we make more trains? Does the world need more trains? Maybe we can increase locomotive production. I don't know. But those are all sensitive to larger shifts in the broader economy. You have to have a lot of people who are already generating the spillover benefits in a region for that to happen. How do you attract somebody who could earn $130,000, $150,000 a year working which is nothing really, in a big city, right, to Muncie to come and work here and live here? You've got to make the quality of life be worthwhile, and that primarily, again, people are most sensitive regarding schools when it comes to that kind of thing. Yeah, Amy.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here, having a money conversation. It's
Yeah.
really hard.
Thanks.
So I'm going to ask you to interpret, which you would probably say is not your job, but in the context of SB1 and the losses to state, counties, community level, I would be interested in your thoughts on how the average family here in Muncie is going to be impacted. We have almost a 30% poverty rate. I think average personal income is like, what, 47,000, household 60-something, if I'm remembering that correctly. And as we see investments in public infrastructure go away, I mean, I'm just going to say it, Muncie has an enormous pothole problem, among other things. What is the average resident of Muncie? What is their quality of life going to be like without? And then I should also mention, so that the way that with state cuts and public cuts, there are nonprofit institutions that sometimes can pick up the slack, right? But funding to those institutions is also going away. So then, I'm gonna ask, if that, then what? What do families do to make it?
They can live with me.
Did you say donate?
But I said they can live with me.
Oh, they can donate plasma.
I've done that. Yep, that works for me too. One economic theory says that if you give people more of their own money back, they'll spend it better. And so the question is how much. This is the big debate, right? This is whether government is better at providing some services as compared to the market. It's a huge debate, huge discussion, right? We sometimes lack the tools to actually be able to analyze that very well. I'm not going to come down on one side or the other, at least not right now. For low-income families who are primarily like the recipients of these services, the most direct impact that I can imagine right now is going to be through employment opportunities. Infrastructure, I think the infrastructure problems can be netted out by an increase in local property taxes, or in local income taxes rather. Why haven't we asked for higher property or higher income taxes in Delaware County already in order to address the pothole problem? Are we willing to make that trade-off as citizens of the region? Or is the administration of filling in potholes poorly executed? These are all possible situations, right? So I'm kind of punting, but those are the broad outlines of how I would start to think about those kinds of issues.
I'm curious what the thoughts are of the council with the impacts of SB1 locally.
Well, my thoughts are we're trying to learn as much as possible. It takes 54 pages long. There's an enormous change coming. The local income tax is now, Muncie Land
I would add on to all that, right? It's a hugely volatile time politically. So many policies are being changed, major policies are being affected, and every volatile shift like that generates costs in terms of figuring the new thing out. And among the costs is the decisions that are being made by investors about where to build, what to invest in. And from my understanding right now, investors are sitting on their hands. And when investors sit on their hands, economic growth slows down. Quality of life in the long run doesn't achieve the levels that we would have expected it to achieve. So we call those transitional costs, right? And we're exasperating transitional costs. And I don't understand how 354 pages is supposed to be transparent. But I mean, that's actually small for legislation overall, right? So.
So what does your data, I mean, capital is like water, right? It looks for an outlet. How long do you think that uncertainty can be sustained before the capital just makes another choice, goes to another country, does something different?
To the extent that capital is invested in hard assets, right, it's stuck. How expensive would it be for CanPack to take all of the machinery located here in Muncie, put it on trucks, take it to Mexico, and buy new, more automated machinery to operate here in Muncie? I think it could be done in 5 weeks. So things can happen quickly, more quickly than you expect. And a lot of modern capital isn't bolted to the floor in the same way that old machines used to be. Yeah.
Different from the local taxes, more on the tariff issues.
Sure.
There are a number of smaller manufacturers in Muncie that were basically either manufacturers or warehouses for manufacturers in China. And if the tariff levels are sustained over 6 months to a year, is there a real chance that you could probably lose 4, 5, 6 manufacturers and warehouses in the city because of that?
Manufacturers either are importing parts of their product from China that are assembled there, or resources like steel. There's no good reason for a tariff on steel. So the cost of production increases. If the cost of production gets above what you can recover by selling your product, you stop making it, right? You stop making it. If the idea behind tariffs is to make it more expensive for foreigners to sell their products in the United States and to encourage domestic production of the same goods, but the production of those goods domestically is more expensive than production of it abroad, so the prices go up. Economists have said for forever, since Adam Smith, that a tariff is a tax on the consumer, the domestic consumer. There may be national security reasons to allow for a tariff, but generally, otherwise it's purely protectionist. So we're dealing with neo-mercantilists, is what the economist would say today. So that's what's going on there. That's positive analysis. That's not preaching. I'll preach if you want, but that's not that's just, this is what happens, right? And it's been shown over and 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 over again. Yeah, one of my mentors at George Mason, where I did my graduate work, is a guy named Tom Rustici, and his dissertation claims that the Great Depression, the real trigger for the Great Depression was the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. That all the other stuff that was happening, that was kind of run of the mill, but you had the tariffs on top of everything else, kaboom. I'm not a fan. So, thank you all so much. My email is ndsnow@bsu.edu. I'm in my office all the time talking with students. I've got public X, Twitter, and Facebook accounts that I sometimes post to. So if you want to reach out, I'm happy to chat and talk. If you got ideas for things that you'd like for me to look into, I'm open to those too. So thank you very much. Nice to meet all of you and to talk to some of you again.
Thanks, Nathan.